Greetings. Father Mark signing on, continuing the survey of medieval church history. We move into the reign of Pope 189, Martin IV. Pope Nicholas III died on August 22nd, 1280, after which the church remained sede vacante, meaning no pope, vacant seat, vacant throne, technically, for 5 months, as the conclave restrictions of ubi periculum had been suspended and not yet replaced. At the time, the college, meaning in 1280, the College of Cardinals consisted of 13 members. This was the fifth conclave in 5 years, and the third time in 15 years that a papal election took place in Viterbo, outside of Rome. With the collapse of the German Hohenstaufen dynasty, the cardinals were divided between pro-French and two pro-Italian houses, the House Orsini and the House Annibaldi, whom we met last time. In this conclave of 1280, the House Annibaldi formed common cause with the French supporters of Charles of Anjou, King of Naples, Sicily. We met him previously. He was a younger brother of King Louis IX of France, and whom Louis and previous popes had supported as King of Naples, Sicily, in order to ensure that the German to take it away, in other words, from the German Hohenstaufens. So the House Annibaldi, even though they were Italian, sided with the pro-French faction in order to try to ruin their hated fellow Italian rivals of the House Orsini. Urban violence took place in Rome, which was a lamentable feature of the times. Urban violence also took place in Viterbo among supporters of all these factions. According to the liturgical calendar of the time, February 2nd, 1280, was the feast of the Purification of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Now it's the Presentation, Feast of the Presentation. So this meant a large mass would take place at the Cathedral of San Lorenzo in Viterbo, which was right next to the palace where the cardinals met for this election. A carefully orchestrated mob, simulating spontaneous action, broke into the palace and kidnapped 2 of the cardinals, coincidentally, relatives of the late Pope, Nicholas III, who had been pro-French. So these were brothers, Matteo and Giordano Orsini. The conclave then, after they were gone, then conformed to the Franco-Annibaldi alliance, electing an ethnically French guy who was cardinal priest of Santa Cecilia. His name was Simon de Brion. Simon, then D-E, then B-R-I-O-N. He accepted what was now a unanimous election on February 22nd, 1281, taking the name as Pope Martin V. Martin IV. So this is Pope 189, Martin IV. This guy, Simon de Brion, was his father Jean was the sieur, or the lord, the seigneur of. So he was of that class. He was an aristocrat, but a lower level aristocrat. Like he was in the club, so to speak, but he was not a duke or anything. But he was in the aristocracy. So we're going to have the feudalism problem again. Simon was born around the year 1210, within the present boundaries of the city of Paris. He was born in the family chateau, studied in Paris, then went to Italy, studied in Padua and Bologna, after which his family secured for him position as canon of Saint-Quentin in 1238, supplemented by a duplicate appointment as canon to the cathedral chapter in Rouen. So here we have the feudalism problem. See, the family just sending him into the church without, any vocation. And in those positions, as being a canon of two cathedrals, he gets income from both of those, plus he has influence over the cathedral chapter, and that would put him in a position to rise higher in the church so he could use the influence, revenue, connections of the church for the benefit of the family. This is all the feudalism problem. However, now someone in that position could easily just be a parasite and do nothing for the rest of their lives, but evidently he was skillful, a person of talent as well as being connected. He received appointment as treasurer of the Church of St. Martin of Tours. He received this appointment from no less a person than King, later canonized Saint Louis IX of France. In 1260, King Louis appointed this guy chancellor of the royal household. The next year, December 17th, 1261, the new French Pope, Urban IV, Jacques Pantaleon, who we met previously, appointed Simon de Briand to the College of Cardinals, made him cardinal priest of Santa Cecilia, and appointed him papal legate to France. At the time, now papal ambassadors are called nuncios, papal nuncios, but that didn't exist yet. So as papal legate, he functioned both as papal ambassador as well as to the royal, to the king, to the monarch of France, but also as a conduit of information and jurisdiction back and forth between the Pope and the French Church. And de Briand was routinely reappointed as legate to France by subsequent popes until he himself was elected pope. One long-lasting result of Simon's background was a lifelong relationship of started as an alliance, I'm sure, but became genuine friendship with Charles d'Anjou, the younger brother of King Louis IX of France. So recall, everything changed. We keep mentioning this is one of those dates, the year 1250, where the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II of von Hohenstaufen died. Owing to the multi-century habit of European aristocracy and royalty of only marrying each other, most of the ruling families of Europe had claims on the territory of all the other families. Frederick, before his death, controlled present-day Germany, much of Central and Southern Europe, Northern Italy, Southern Italy, Sicily, and was officially king of the Crusader kingdom of the Holy Land, Kingdom of Jerusalem, Outremer, the kingdom over the sea. Now, as we previously covered, his descendants were not able to hold all of that realm intact. For our story, the salient change pertained to the kingdom of Naples in southern Italy and the island of Sicily off the coast. So, just to refresh our memories here, this is Naples. So there's the city of Naples, and then Sicily, island of Sicily. So when I say Naples, even though it's a city, I'm referring to the kingdom of Naples, which controlled southern Italy and the mainland, and then Sicily, the island off the coast. The northern border of the kingdom of Naples was the southern border of the papal state, so no pope could afford to ignore it. And its strategic position in the sticking out into the middle of the Mediterranean Sea meant that no one who made money from maritime commerce could remain indifferent to whoever was controlling Naples and Sicily. Claimants, because of all the intermarriages, claimants to the throne of Naples and Sicily included the German house of Hohenstaufen, the French house of Anjou, the Spanish house of Jimenez, which governed the kingdom of Aragon prior to Spanish unification, and the Byzantine Greeks, still claimed it, as based on the ancient Roman imperial maps. And local Sicilian families preferred the classical Hellenic model of city-state autonomy and didn't particularly want to be part of a kingdom. Even if it was an indigenous Sicilian king, they just would rather have each city be independent. Bitter experience at the hands of the predatory Hohenstaufens contrasted with the support of the French under King Louis IX. That prompted late 13th century popes to support French claimants to Naples and Sicily. So, as papal legate, it fell to Cardinal Legate Simon de Brion to ensure and coordinate French involvement in Italian affairs in support of the Holy See. King Louis IX proposed his younger brother Charles to Anjou for Naples and Sicily, rather than, which the Pope would have preferred, just if Louis just conquer it himself, just make himself king of Naples and Sicily. But Louis was planning to go on crusade to the Holy Land, so he didn't want to expend his resources doing that, so he recommended his younger brother Charles. Charles, of course, he had to fight because the local Neapolitans, the Italians and the Sicilians, were not going to accept a French ruler without a fight. So Charles had to fight. He did. He defeated and killed the Hohenstaufen claimant, who was a son of the late Emperor Frederick II, Manfred von Hohenstaufen. Charles engaged and defeated him and killed him at the Battle of Benevento on February 26, 1266, beginning Charles's long involvement in Italian affairs, which included meddling in the conclave of 1281 to ensure the election of Cardinal Simon de Brion, who had been his ally for decades, as far back as, when he was papal legate. Chancellor, as he was chancellor of the royal household first before he became papal legate. So Simon had been, entwined with the royal family, the House Capet, for decades before he became pope. So, as pope, Martin V, as a Frenchman, Martin was not safe as pope, either in Viterbo or in Rome. So he had to hold his coronation as pope in the Kingdom of Naples, controlled by Charles de Anjou. So he was actually crowned pope in Orvieto on March 23rd, 1281. As pope, he never visited Rome, never set foot in Rome. On April 30th, 1281, Pope Martin appointed Charles a senator of Rome, providing a laughable legal cover for anything Charles wished to do in terms of conquering the city of Rome. Now, as it happens, Charles was not able to actually do anything in Rome because 11 months later, history changed. To understand this, we must become acquainted with a Neapolitan physician named Giovanni de Procida, Procida. Giovanni de Procida, or John of Procida, was born the same year as Pope Martin IV, born in the year 1210, but born in Salerno, Italy. Now remember, we visited Salerno. It's not. Oh yeah, here it is. The print is so small. Damn. Okay. So right there, see the Gulf of Salerno. So it's in Neapolitan territory. So he was born he was a citizen of the Kingdom of Naples, in other words. But he was of the professional class rather than the landed aristocracy, like the Pope. Procida Giovanni studied medicine at the famous Scuola Medica, the medical school at Salerno, which we previously covered, was a proto-university of the medieval period. And he became a well-regarded physician and later was returned to his alma mater as a professor to teach medicine. So in this way, he became involved with the Hohenstaufen royalty of Germany, just as Simon de Brion, the future Pope Martin IV, had become involved with the French royalty. Naples was, as we saw, part of the Hohenstaufen Empire of Frederick II, part of the Holy Roman Empire. Salerno was part of the Kingdom of Naples, which was, at the time, was a fief, was a constituent member of the Holy Roman Empire. When Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor, sent scouts to recruit a personal physician for himself and his family, Professor Giovanni da Procida was recommended. And so the offer was made. He was flattered, of course, and accepted the position. So he entered service of the Hohenstaufen family. Through service to them, first to Frederick II, Procida entered international affairs, or at least was exposed to international affairs, because Frederick traveled constantly, and as personal physician, he traveled with him. So he was able to make contacts, have a network. And Procida, just as the future Martin V did, by means of his service to the French royalty as Chancellor of the royal household. Both of them, Simon de Brion, who became Martin V, and Giovanni da Procida, both of them remained sincerely loyal. As we'll see, it wasn't just it wasn't just political or economic, that it was sincerely, personally loyal to each of the royal families they served, German and French. When Frederick II died in 1250, Dr. Procida continued serving the Hohenstaufens in the person of Frederick's son, Manfred von Hohenstaufen, and was present at the Battle of Benevento, which Manfred lost, and during which Manfred was killed by Charles d'Anjou. Charles d'Anjou was the one that the future Pope Martin IV served. Now, being on the losing side, Dr. Procida's lands were forfeit to the winners. The French troops who carried out the confiscation of his property brutalized and raped Procida's wife and daughter. And when Procida was not there at the time, he was out, but and one of his sons was there, and of course he drew his sword, tried to defend his mother and his sister, but the French troops just killed him, murdered Procida's son, raped his wife and daughter. Procida heard about it, of course, after the fact, too late to do anything, so he fled to Venice, because he would have been executed, if they had captured him. Went to Venice first, then to Germany, seeking a way to restore the Hohenstaufens to Naples, Sicily. Over the ensuing years, he connected with people that he had met while following around Frederick II. He networked with everyone that he knew who had antipathy, either to Charles d'Anjou in particular, or to the French in general, or who were just simply greedy, to have access to the lucrative ports of Naples and Sicily. This included this network that Procida assembled, this alliance, this anti-Angevin alliance, included the city of Genoa in northwestern Italy. That's up here in northwestern Italy. Which was a maritime rival of Naples, and therefore they did not want Naples linked with France, because France also had ports on the Mediterranean. Another member was the Byzantine Greeks, as Charles had ambitions to repeat the Latin conquest of Constantinople, which had taken place in 1204, as we covered previously. And the Greeks had just managed to retake Constantinople in 1261. So Charles d'Anjou knew they were weak and vulnerable, knew it could be done. So he wanted to conquer Constantinople, make himself emperor, Byzantine emperor. And additionally, a third member of the alliance, the anti-Angevin alliance, was Peter III, or Pedro III, who was the king of Aragon and Valencia. and he was also Count of Barcelona. So Spain, let's see. All right. Spain, as we covered earlier, not only was not a single country, the Iberian, the peninsula here, the Iberian Peninsula, was not only not a unified country at this point. It was part of it was controlled by the Muslims. The southern half of the peninsula was controlled by the Muslims, and even among the Christians, there were separate constituent kingdoms. So let's see, Valencia here, and Barcelona up here. So on that side of the peninsula, that's where Pedro III of the House of Jimenez was the ruler. So what is he doing with that? I wonder how you see how the French get involved in the Germans, but what is this guy way over in Spain? How does he get involved in this? Well, marriage. All right, so that's another part of the feudalism problem. Of course, we focus on its deleterious effects on the church. Families sending in sons and daughters to the church without a genuine vocation, but feudalism also corrupted by such misuse the sacrament of matrimony. So they would arrange marriages, for political and economic reasons, regardless of, and so that's part of what happened. So earlier in life, before Frederick II died, no, it was after Frederick died. But before Manfred died. It was after Frederick died, but before Manfred died. A marriage alliance was arranged between Pedro III of Aragon, and he married Constance, who was the daughter of Manfred von Hohenstaufen, and therefore the granddaughter of the Emperor Frederick II. So through her, after Manfred was killed in battle 4 years later at Benevento, Manfred so then Constance, as his heir, had a claim on Naples and Sicily. And Pedro, as her husband, decided to press, he wanted to press that claim. Because you see where he is, he's on the Mediterranean side of Spain. And then, going across the Mediterranean, Naples and Sicily's on that side of Italy. So that would give him, see it better. Yeah. Okay, so why he was so involved in this. So you see Spain, you see Barcelona up here, where his base is, and then over here you have Naples and Sicily. So this gives him, at either side, he would be able to have influence on trade on both sides of this end of the Mediterranean. So that's why it was worth the investment for him to get involved. And as we will see, it paid off. Long-term preparation for an anti-French uprising in Sicily had been well laid by Charles himself. He did everything he could, and his French goons with him did everything he could to make himself and make themselves despised by the Sicilians. Rapacious tax theft, brutalization of the Sicilian population, profligate waste of all the money that they stole, to wage foreign wars, serving his personal ambitions and that of his, of his French relatives. In other words, taking the money out of Sicily. Sicily, because of the ports, if they had a lot, they could have been very, very wealthy. But since he was controlling it, all that money was just taken out, but it wasn't spent on. So the Sicilians weren't benefiting from it. In other words, so that had been going on for a long time. But proximate cause for solidifying the anti-Angevin alliance, the Procida alliance, into action was Charles assembling a fleet at Messina, one of the Sicilian ports. Officially, this was to go on crusade, like his older brother Louis IX had. But it was widely understood that he was going to first attack Constantinople and take it from the Greeks as the previous Fourth Crusade, the Fallen Crusade, had done in 1204. So he would make himself Byzantine emperor, if he could. So that's what got the Genoa, the Byzantine Greeks, and Peter III to not only say, oh yeah, we hate the guy's guts and we want him to fall and we'll get around to it eventually, to move from that to, oh yeah, okay, let's get, we have to start moving, really get our ships together, really get our troops together, and really start spending some money to make this happen. The immediate trigger brings us to sunset on Easter Monday, March 30th, 1282. Vespers, evening prayer, was being offered in the Church of the Holy Spirit outside of Palermo, Sicily. So Palermo is on the northern side of the island, and Messina is over here. This is where the fleet. Messina was assembling. Messina is the place where Charles was mustering his fleet, and then but Palermo over here is where the uprising actually started. So this is called the Sicilian Vespers, which led to the War of the Sicilian Vespers. So what happened? March 30th, 1282. A group of French soldiers came by the church, and they were drunk, And according to the story, a sergeant and among the French soldiers named Drouet dragged a young woman from the crowd. She happened to be married, and he started, groping her and was going to, proceed further. But not only was she married, but her husband was in the vicinity, and he saw what was going on. So he wasted Drouet. He whipped out his knife and just straight up killed the guy. Then the other Frenchmen, first they tried to assist their comrade, and then, even after he was killed, and they tried to capture the Sicilian guy to, kill him or punish him. But then the Sicilian crowd became involved. So these Frenchmen against the Sicilians. So then you have the ethnic hatred, and then everything explodes. At that moment, all the church bells in Palermo began to ring for Vespers. Now, this suggests the possibility that this entire altercation was a setup. But whether it was or not, what happened afterward is that to the sound of bells, messengers ran through the city, calling on the men of Palermo to rise up and just kill all the Frenchmen. Just kill them all. By the next morning, 2,000 French men and women were dead. And Giovanni Procida's rebels controlled the city. And it spread throughout the island. Within 6 weeks, the entire island of Sicily was in rebel hands, at least rebel from the perspective of the Angevins. Of course, from the Sicilian perspective, it was, this was a nationalist uprising. This was an independence thing, Sicily for the Sicilians. So within 6 weeks, they controlled everything in Sicily except the port of Messina, which was very well fortified on the land side, and then, of course, as a port, it could be supplied from the sea. That ended on April 28th, 1282, when Sicilians inside of Messina rose up, set fire to Charles's fleet in the harbor, and opened the gates to the revolutionaries, on the outside. The various Sicilian cities then sent ambassadors to Pope Martin IV, begging that he recognize them as free cities, as city-states like Genoa, Florence, Venice, Pisa, self-governing cities. And they would acknowledge, in return, they would acknowledge the Pope as their feudal suzerain. So in other words, they wanted to be self-governing, but then to fit into the legal framework of feudalism, they would essentially become fiefs of the Holy See, and the Pope would be their lord, but he would allow them internal self-governance, sort of like bishops in a diocese. Not exactly, because there'd be no sacramental with this, but it would be like the bishop administers his diocese, but acknowledges the Pope. And that's it. So that's kind of what they wanted. But remember, the relationship between Martin went back back when he was Simon de Brion, as far back as being chancellor to the French king. He had a long, lifelong association with the House Capet, the French ruling family, of which Charles was a member. So he was not, Charles wanted Sicily back. And since Martin supported Charles, then Martin wanted Sicily back for Charles. Despite the loss of Charles's fleet, which Martin must have understood meant bankruptcy for Charles, he remained loyal to Charles. So he commanded the Sicilian ambassadors from these various towns and cities to return and inform the leaders that they were morally obliged to submit to Charles once again and to beg his pardon for their actions. Now, we covered a little of Pope Martin's biography. A man of his experience, international diplomatic experience, had to know that this was a pointless gesture. That there was zero possibility that the Sicilians were going to do that. So by commanding them to do something that it kept loyalty to his friend Charles, but something he knew was futile, then he forfeited any chance of an alliance with the Sicilians. This is the most striking indication that Martin's loyalty to Charles and the French royal family was personal and not just political. Because as Pope, and frankly, Charles probably would have understood, given the situation, if Martin had just cut a deal with the Sicilians, just say, okay, yes, we'll recognize you, as independent city-states in Sicily, and Charles will just be king of Naples on the mainland. Charles probably would have understood that, but Martin still supported him. It's really astonishing. Anyway, 10 months later, the next phase of Giovanni Procida's plan was ready. On February 2nd, 1283, Peter III, King of Aragon, husband of the granddaughter of the previous Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, invaded Sicily, brought his wife with him, because it's her claim he's asserting. Now, Charles had no means of stopping him, so Peter was able to bring his troops on the island. And now the Sicilians, that they would not necessarily have welcomed changing, one overlord who was French for another overlord who was Spanish. Because we know from their petition to Pope Martin what they wanted. They wanted to be, like the Italian city-states, Genoa, Venice, Florence, which were independent. So it could have been that Peter could have been walking into a trap, and then they could have fought him. But he had Giovanni Procida with him, who also had contacts among the Sicilian city-states. And he assured them, because Peter had agreed, that Peter would give them the deal they wanted from Pope Martin. That if they would recognize, Constance, because Constance was the granddaughter of the emperor, so if they'd recognize her as queen of Sicily and recognize Peter as the king consort, the king, have the crown matrimonial, that he in turn would grant them he would individually the cities, like Palermo and Messina, individually the cities would be city-states. They would have their own, the Signoria, they'd have their own city council, which would be elected, and elect their own podesta, their own magistrate. And, in return, they would recognize Peter, Constance and Peter, and their heirs as their feudal overlords, as their kings. So the Sicilians went for that deal. And he was crowned. Peter and Constance were crowned as king and queen of Sicily in Palermo on September 4th. Now, in Italian history, he then becomes Peter or Pedro I as king of Sicily, but he was Peter III in Spanish history as king of Aragon. Meanwhile, Charles, the loss of his fleet rendered Charles unable to salvage his claim to the island of Sicily, but he did retain sufficient troops on the mainland to sustain himself as king of Naples. Pope Martin IV appointed 7 French cardinals. Appointed 7 cardinals who were all ethnically French. That's the significance. Meanwhile, Charles raised taxes on his remaining holdings in Naples, which is all of southern Italy, to raise money to rebuild a fleet, as he refused to accept that Sicily was lost forever. He thought if he spent a few years, building the fleet, then he could invade and, take it back. To assist him, Pope Martin excommunicated Peter III and Giovanni de Procida and the Byzantine Emperor Michael VIII. Because all of those had been in an alliance against Charles d'Anjou. Further, Pope Martin declared Peter III deposed from his own hereditary kingdom of Aragon. And Pope Martin summoned a crusade against Peter and Constance in Sicily in an effort to attract recruits to fight for Charles d'Anjou. But it was all for nothing. Pope Martin was in Perugia, seeking allies, as he saw it, to restore Charles as King of Sicily. And then he fell ill suddenly, so it's probably poison, on October 4th, 1284. He never fully recovered from this illness. Meanwhile, his lifelong friend and ally Charles d'Anjou also dropped dead on January 7th, 1285, at the age of 57, also poisoned. Pope Martin died 2 months later, March 28th, 1285. Meanwhile, Giovanni de Procida continued serving Peter and Constance. They made him Grand Chancellor of Sicily, a position which he held until his death 4 years later in 1298 at the age of 88. So Pope Martin, when he died, he had reigned for 4 years, 1 month, and 6 days. He was followed as Pope 190 by Honorius IV. So we will pause here, and we will cover Pope Honorius in a separate video. So for now, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.